Danny from Dallas, Texas asks, I'll listen to Catholic podcasts and they often bring up the topic of Freemasonry. What exactly is it, and why does the church condemn it? From my understanding, it just seems like a men's club. It's actually not just a men's club. That's the facade. The interior, once you get in, it's very, very different and very diabolical. But Father, any advice for Danny?
A Catholic cannot be a Freemason and be in good standing. A Catholic cannot be a Freemason and receive the sacraments. A Catholic who is a Freemason should cease to be a Freemason rather than ceasing to be a Catholic. So, Danny, as Rudy says, Freemasonry is not a mere men's club. It has a long and sort of complex history that I'm sure some of our listeners know more about than I. What I need to know as a priest is deliverance ministry for those who've been a part of it, who have committed the sin of potentially apostasy from Jesus Christ, denying his very identity, his divinity, in the rites of entrance into the Freemasons, especially at higher levels, and those who have exposed themselves to spiritual dangers through the mockery of the mysteries of Catholicism that the rites of Freemasonry are surrounded by, or are modeled after. So I would actually recommend, if I could, I would listen to the episodes on Freemasonry from the Exorcist Files podcast. If you are a person who is disturbed by listening, is aware of that podcast and its popularity, knows the dramatic episode format, and is kind of disturbed by them, then don't listen to the dramatic case file of the Freemasons. Rather, listen to some of the informational interviews about them. If you just look at Father Carlos Martins or any of the other kind of popular public speaking exorcists like Father Dan Rehill, Father Chad Ripperger, Father Vincent Lambert, or others, any of the time that they speak on Freemasonry, they're speaking from their personal experience in the context of deliverance and the research they've had to do into the nature of Freemasonry to aid them with deliverance and exorcism, that will speak to exactly why a Catholic should not be a Freemason. But regardless, we are actually prohibited from being members or associated with Freemasonry because this is the law of the church for our good. If any of you out there, like Danny, if you're a Knight of Columbus, by the way, I mean, one of the reasons the Knights of Columbus were founded was so that, among other reasons, men would stop joining other secret societies, fraternal societies that would sort of provide them with certain important things like insurance for their family should anything happen to them in work context, but were bad because they would lead us away from Christ and into spiritual danger, and I should say grave spiritual danger. Now, people will ask questions. Can I go to a Shriners hospital? My child has a burn, and the only hospital in Massachusetts that children go to for burns like this is the Shriners Hospital. And no, it's not like every aspect of anything supported by the Freemason Association is a spiritual danger in itself, but I would avoid it. You know, I wouldn't rent the Freemasonic Lodge for your event. I'd stick with the Sons of Italy or the Knights of Columbus Hall or whatever might be in your area. And if there's doubts you have because you seem to be in a tight spot, again, I would go speak to a priest about it, but you'd want to speak to a priest that is aware that this ban against the Freemasons is not a relic of the past church being against everything. This is a real and present, a near and present spiritual danger. So we want to be very careful. Yeah,
it's an interesting subject. A lot of people find it interesting. I'm curious, actually, Father, you being in New England, do you have a lot of encounters with people who need deliverance prayers, specifically from Freemasonry?
Well, in my little parish here, I've had requests. I haven't seen any sort of paranormal activity, anything unusual. So I'm just going on people's testimony, what they're telling me. And what I'm looking at when I'm seeing them is sometimes in conflict with that. So I'll pray with them. Mostly they're away from the sacrament. So I tell them, you have to come back to God. Through hearing the Exorcist Files, Father Martins has said, and he said he's conferred with other exorcists around the country, that they find in most cases people tend to walk away, even up to three out of 4 cases, if they would rather live with whatever is causing the bondage than to come back to Christ and be free. They'd rather live in Egypt than head to the promised land, even through the desert. So I think I've encountered some of that. Tell them, okay, adoration's tomorrow at this time. There's confessions offered during that time. Here's an examination of conscience. Come to confession and come back to Mass. And, you don't see them again. So there's some of that, but again, I have not personally seen evidence of paranormal activity, but the diocese has, the Archdiocese of Boston is receiving more and more cases. And I'd say the number one concern we should have is just to keep our spiritual life up. Why is there an increase inactivity, it's not because each individual Catholic is at greater danger that they need to be sort of disrupted from their normal lives with an overwhelming fear of evil. The main issue for people out there is that they do not live with God, and they just don't care. They don't believe that there's any real evil in the world other than not getting to do whatever sins they want to do. And that is the real reason for, I think, the first reason for the increase, and the fact that people are fundamentally religious people. So if they're not going to practice Christianity, they're going to seek other spiritual activities that are increasingly sold in stores, like crystals and sage to burn and things like this, if not worse things like on Amazon or Target selling Ouija boards and the like. So they're just getting caught in it because they're not listening to resources like this and heeding the warning of Christ that Christ has for all of us to put these things away. And it's even such to the point that people will come, and I'll do general confessions as they come back to the church, and I say, have you ever engaged in the occult? And they'll just say no. And then later we'll get into some point where they have contacted a medium, they've gone to a psychic, they've had tarot cards read. I said occult. What do you think that is? Occult. 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 And they act like they don't speak the word or don't know what it is, which could be an effect of exactly what they were doing in the past. But the look on my face when people tell me their laundry list of their occult activities after they specifically said they haven't ever done that, when they're telling me they're having trouble sleeping and, they believe they might have something going on in their life is incredible. So people do need to wake up. But for people that are practicing the faith and heeding all these warnings, I know sometimes a priest once told me, you can have a parish mass and say, there's one person that has blue hair. If anyone listening has blue hair, I'm sorry, this is going to offend you, but he might say, we got to stop wearing blue hair to mass. We should all just have our regular hair color. And everybody in the church will come up to you and ask is it me, Father? Everybody except the person with blue hair will come up and ask. So sometimes that happens. The listeners who are not engaged in the occult will be sort of obsessively worried about, say, generational curses or the like. And I'd say if nothing is happening in your life to suggest that that's going on, then you just live your normal spiritual life. If you start to notice anything strange, bring it to your priest you trust, and just seek simple renunciations. You can just renounce any attachments to Freemasonry in your ancestry, especially if you have Scottish ancestry and things like that. So start there also with simple renunciations in the name of Jesus, especially in the presence of the church, and even during confession. If you'd like to do it, your priest would be open to that.